Reaperman here, and today I'd like to talk about the Blaze Evercade. Now this was a little emulation handheld I certainly hadn't expected to like a whole lot, but after spending some time with it, it's actually pretty okay. Now what makes this kind of low-powered software emulation device different than say a POW Kitty or an Anbernic is that it's actually tied to these cartridges that slot into the back. So these are licensed cartridges by the owners of the rights or the developers of the games, and what they do is they allow us to play a variety of games for old systems, both old from back in the day and slightly newer games like Tanglewood here from 2018. Now, one attractive thing, actually the thing that attracted me to the system were these cartridges and the kind of value they provide. Now, they come in a nice plastic clamshell that's individually numbered with some box art on the back and all that stuff. And inside you've got the game cartridge here with a label on one side and a printed label on the other, but it's got this interesting curve that kind of meshes in with the curve on the back of the handheld, and I think that's actually pretty neat. They also come with manuals, color manuals in fact. Now the information in the manuals kind of varies in quality a bit, but it's nice to see a color manual with a description of the game and maybe a little screenshot of it. So that's nice. Anyway, what's really nice about these is they come in at a $20 price point. So for example, this cartridge here has Xenocrisis and Tanglewood both on it, and if you were to go out and buy those ROMs individually, you'd already be over the 20 bucks it costs to get in on it here. They're also tend to be a lot less than their eShop ROM equivalents if you're, into the Nintendo eShop or anything like that. And you can find a lot of games that you're just not going to find on that eShop. For example, all of these Atari games for 2600 and 7800, and some actual care was kind of put into the game selection here. They've got some a little more rare favorites like Ninja Golf here, and that one can be a real pain to get a hold of. Motorcycle, well, it's not really a favorite, but it can be a real pain to get a hold of. I've been trying for years, still don't have one yet. And let's see, going down here to the Lynx collection that I had in my hand before, one interesting thing about this is it has a couple of newer games, Remnant and Cybervirus, which are actually newer games that are put out by Songbird. So that's kind of nice. Songbird, by the way, it happens to be a vendor of Evercade, so they've reached some kind of partnership that seems to be doing well for them. Anyway, so this thing's got a handheld screen and an output. This output on the current device is 720p. If you haven't heard, they've already announced a consoleized version of this, which takes 2 game cartridges slotted in the front. Pre-orders, I believe, just opened yesterday on it, so it's somewhat topical. That will have a 720p output with scanline option, 1080p output with scanline options. This one is only going to be 720p, and I don't believe there are any scanline options. Now, the screen itself is actually a pretty fair unit. Let's see if it gets mad at me for unplugging it. Yeah, it actually got mad at me for unplugging it, so I'll turn it back on. The screen itself is actually fairly nice on this device. Viewing angles are, fairly modern, I would say. The D-pad it's alright. It maybe presses down in the middle a lot more than I want it to, but it's got a nice disc, and you can roll it if you want to. The top switches up here appear to be micro switched, and that's always welcome. It does have stereo speakers, one on each side it appears, headphone jack on the bottom. This USB is for charging. And that brings me to a slight negative about this device, is that it's got a built-in battery. And I tend not to like that on my handhelds because I'm a weirdo, and what I'll do is I'll buy a game system and then I'll throw it into a drawer for 10 years. And the next time I want to play it, there's no battery, so that's kind of a bummer for me. Anyway, you tend to boot up to one of these menus, which lets you select games here, and Xenocrisis is actually probably my favorite game on the system. I seem to be on track to purchasing every single version of this game, since I've got it on Dreamcast, Sega Genesis, Switch, Evercade here, and I'm hearing that they're about to come out with the MVS version that I ordered a few years ago. So we'll have a look at some gameplay a little bit later on. I just wanted to talk a little bit about this system. Now, for a system called the Evercade, you might wonder why they're only coming out with console ports of games, even things that they could certainly do the arcade version of. For example, there's Magical Drop 2 in this Data East collection, and it's the Super Nintendo port, which I don't think anybody really wants. They want the Neo Geo one, and if you're doing the Neo Geo one, then they'd want Magical Drop 3, I'd assume. But they are starting to fix that. They've just announced, alongside the Evercade VS, which is the console, they've announced a line of arcade games. And the arcade games are going to come in little purple boxes. So great, now I've got 2 sets of numbered games to collect. And actually collecting these cartridges, this is probably my main addiction to these, is getting the full set of them, and at least they don't have art that goes from spine to spine, or else it would really bug me that I'm missing actually quite a few of these. But at 20 bucks, they're in the impulse purchase range, and for people that go and, weekly, spend about 20 bucks in the eShop or something like that, you can get about the same number of games just from one of these cartridges. Anyway, let's have a look at these things up on the big screen. Okay, and now we've got it all up on the big screen, and this is Burnin' Rubber, aka Bump and Jump, aka Buggy Popper, and this is the NES version of the game. This is, again, not the arcade version that you would see in like a My Arcade or the upcoming Evercade collection. Now let's have a look at what we can do in here. We can go into the menu, and we actually have save and load states. These are actually kind of handy. I don't tend to like to use these to cheat, but what's kind of neat is in these NES games, you can save your high scores with them. Not that I actually have a high score in this game. If you go under settings, though, they're actually a little more basic than you might think. You've got an aspect ratio option with full screen and original size. Obviously, full screen is going to go off the edge, so I'm not going to show that to you. And language, and I believe that's probably for the OSD. Nah. So it's also a good time to talk about the different systems this thing can do. So historically, we've seen it do Atari 2600, 7800, and Lynx. We've also seen it do Super NES and NES. We've seen it do, this is obviously NES here, we've seen it do Sega Genesis, Game Boy Advance, and PlayStation 1. I believe we've currently only seen one PlayStation 1 game, and if this can do a lot of PlayStation 1 games, that really opens it up for, the mind goes wild as to what could be in here. Now, I'm hearing rumblings that the guys over at GBA Temp have this thing running unintended ROMs, which, okay, that is kind of a neat and promising thing. I'm actually a little more interested in the other way, since I'm a little more interested in maybe dumping some of the homebrews off and playing them in my real hardware or my FPGA hardware, which is probably a little bit more accurate than the software emulation here. But until then, I'll just be satisfied with kind of trying things out on this thing and then going over and buying them. Now, I talked a little bit about the upcoming console, but there's a few other little details about it that they're talking about. They're talking about actually the ability to use this controller as a joystick with it, potentially using the USB connector up here on the, or down here on the bottom. And there's also some rumblings that USB joysticks in general are going to work on the thing. So that's a good thought. In fact, there's some conversations about spinners and wheels and stuff like that, because a lot of the Atari games in the Atari Arcade collection rely on control systems that aren't a D-pad and buttons and aren't really compatible with those. Interestingly, also the Atari collection seems to lean heavily on vector display technologies, which tend to look like butt when emulated, but that's just my opinion. Let's give this a brief try here. Way back in this channel, when I revived it back in just after I got the NT Mini, one of my first videos was actually covering the different versions of this that would play on that console. And this particular version of the game has a weird fuel mechanic that the others don't seem to have. Boom. I mean, fuel isn't really a super concern, especially on level 1, but it does get to be a little bit worrying. It's just one more thing to kind of mess you up in this game. Other than that, this is a spectacular version of the game. The NES version is not bad at all. Now, it's also the NES version of Burger Time on this particular cartridge, and that's a little disappointing. Because there are definitely better versions of Burger Time out there, or more interesting versions. And I wonder if in the future we'll see multiple consoles worth of the same game. I wonder if they can be perhaps licensed at the same time. And then especially for Burger Time, ooh, there's a spectacular 7800 homebrew by, I believe, Ken Siders. And I think he's passed in the years since that was released, unfortunately. But it would be kind of neat to see, to see Beef Drop, which is what the game's called, with the actual Burger Time logo on the top playing on the 7800, because it's a much better version than the NES version that's on here. Also, I'm hearing that there's going to be Intellivision games coming soon, and I don't know about ColecoVision. I'm just thinking about all the different versions of Burger Time that I've played especially. So in reality, I'm of about two minds about this system. The rational half of me knows that this is a low-powered software emulation console, and it's going to have all the weaknesses associated with that, as well as all of the extra weaknesses associated with taking carts over the much more convenient ROM files, etc. And the other half of me is just so overwhelmed by how charming this little system is. It's just kind of a random stuff to buy system. When you just want something new and then you have $20 sitting around, let's see what Evercade's got. And I think that's really how they hooked me on this. So knowing that irrational half of me, I'm probably going to end up pre-ordering the VS console, and I'm probably going to end up pre-ordering the version with two controllers, because the irrational half of me thinks that it still has friends that want to play this system with him. So, yeah, definitely not the rational half of me talking on this purchase here. Anyway, I like this little console a lot for very silly reasons, and until next time, Reaperman out.